Hello guys and welcome to Realpolitiks. Today I'm going to try to teach you how to play this game as someone that just bought it and is just getting into it. Do note, I am playing with the new Power DLC. I find that it is fairly important for the base game. It definitely smooths out some things that could have used some more development in the base game. I would recommend playing with it. First and foremost, we've booted up just the grand campaign here, and this is what it looks like. We're in the game. This is not all there is. Later there will be ocean locations that you can attack and take over, colonize. Same thing with the Arctic, and eventually in the north there will be space that you can deal with as well. But just note that all of those work the same way as any normal land-based province on the map. So let's just get into it this way. I picked the United States to show you how to play the game because I'm biased, and also it's the greatest for showing a diverse array of things you'll have to deal with in the game. So at the start we have our UI here. We have our good old nation flag. Click on it to go to your capital. You can see what provinces you own in case you're forgetting a couple things you might own, at least by name. Then to the east we can see many different resources we have. Score is important. The most score at the end of the game wins the game. To know the end of the game per what scenario you pick, you could see it when you select your scenario on the main screen when you hit new game. Then we have money, which is affected by debt. I could take out debt to get more money. It's very realistic in that way, as opposed to some grand strategy games that treat debt more like some form of deficit. This actually takes on the modern geopolitical aspects and puts it into more of an arcadey display, but still fun, I would say. Next to that, we have action points. In the beginning of the game, you might feel like you have enough of these, but just note, unless you take steps to ensure that you do, then late game you will run out of these. These will hold you back the most as time goes on, as your projects, which we'll get to later, consume more and more and more, and just the multipliers get worse and worse. Your GDP growth, which is very important in this game, as it starts affecting all kinds of things, like your tax income, for example. Natural resources, these are used mostly by your military, as well as your projects. You can get them from provinces. Now, I've already covered a couple things that use this, so just note you can construct things by right-clicking on any province that you own, and you have a selection of buildings that you can build, some of which need projects to be able to be built. You see helpful little symbols. Social housing can give you population in a region. Tourist infrastructure can give you score. Mining infrastructure gives you natural resources. And then there's these others later on that give you a combination of things. Helpfully, if you're missing anything and you click here, you don't know what you're missing, it'll just bring you right to that project directly if you want to get it later. But again, we'll get into the projects later. There is also HDI. This just measures how smart your population is. It is important, and there's a bunch of notifications that pop up under here that you can click through. There's also the score ranking. This is the important bit. Now, the game gets easier the higher up on this list that you are. With every few years, the country with the highest score are awarded special bonuses. They last until the next prizes are awarded. So in 3 years, these prizes will be awarded. And then a few years later, again. And so you always want to be as high up here as possible, because once you hit number 5, you will have less unhappiness, so more happiness, and more unit max capacity. These values will get better. Army maintenance will go down, and then eventually you even get more of an HDI, Human Development Index. Your population will get smarter, and again, all the bonuses will go up. The higher up you are on this list, the better. So that means if you play any of the best nations on the planet, essentially, United States, Russia, China, Japan, Germany, all the most capable ones, you will have an easier game. This isn't a game like, say, Imperial Rome, where there will be more to manage and so it will be harder. I mean, that can be the case, and that's where action points come in, for example. But you really will have an easier time the bigger, stronger nation you play. The game is simpler if you play smaller European nations. And don't worry, to potentially your benefit or your dismay about local politics, such as, oh, if I pick someone in the Balkans, do I have to worry about Balkan politics? No. No, you don't. Not really. If I pick any nation, perhaps African nation, do I have to worry about the fact that a lot of my people live in villages that are not very developed? We're reliant on foreign aid. There's warlords that roam. No, you don't have to worry about any of this, because every nation kind of plays the same. Sort of, within reason. Politics, economics, there's different variables that will affect how everything feels, but don't expect to pick a nation and have it feel like it does in real life. The closest thing is that there are some scripted storylines depending on your scenario, including in the Grand Campaign, where, for example, if you're America or China, you'll have to gear up for a war over the Pacific, more than likely. Oh, and this is another good UI element to show off. You can occasionally see some little pop-ups over random nations in the world, and you click on it and it will spawn events. There are other random events and timed events as well, but there are events like this where, for example, I can sell nukes that I have made to North Korea to get a quick influx of money. But these aren't toys, so we're not going to be doing that, though I'm sure North Korea thinks that they're toys. Now, if you have lost your hints, your tutorial pop-ups, you can turn them back on up at the top left, or turn them off if they're getting annoying to you. You could also turn off all these fancy schmancy graphics and just get a plain view of the world without detailed cities and trees. Ew, I thought this was a map simulator. Let me just see colors, right? Well, that's how you do that. Next, on the left here is a lot of the UI you're going to be looking at. Starting with internal politics, this is where you see information about your own nation, no matter what. Even if you're clicked on another nation at any point or any other location, you can just click on internal politics and now you're on your own country again. You never have to worry about clicking between your country and another country, because instead there's an internal politics. All these first three really apply to you, and then other country where you could just detailed see information about whatever you're clicked on at will, without having to click back onto it later. Starting with the country details, you can, helpfully, I suppose, rename your nation and even change the flag between a bunch of really random presets. You can even just randomize everything if you really choose to. The customization is maybe simple, but you definitely have that capability. So I could take this weird blue sun thing and name myself Blue Sun Boys if I wanted to. I'm not going to do that, but I definitely could. And I could always hit default in case I'm not happy with what I have done later. Next, we have culture. Culture is important. If a province has your culture, then that is good. If they don't, then they'll be unhappy. For example, in this game, Puerto Rico has a differing culture, so it's something we have to worry about. This means the population in Puerto Rico is going to generate some unhappiness. And so I can go down here to separatism and see every location in my nation that has a different culture or even a different civilization. I can calm them down if they're in any kind of unrest. Otherwise, I can pay money and action points over a long period of time, this is in days, to convert their culture over to me. Generally, you're going to want to do this, but pace your resources. Look, 423 is most of my available action points that are just sitting around. So do be careful. But you'll definitely want to convert things, especially later in the game when it comes to space colonies. They start, you could kind of see it there for a second. If I do this really quickly, you could, bam, see it. The planets up there start to develop some independence cultures that you'll want to definitely clean up as time goes on, as they're a good source of resources without having a lot of population, because as useful as population is, it does end up generating more of a need of action points later on. It increases multipliers that makes your game very difficult. So empty provinces such as planets in space are actually very useful, as well as in the ocean and in the Antarctic, for example. Your civilization is kind of like culture, but it mostly applies to other countries. So America's Western. That means when dealing with other countries that have a Western civilization, we get a bonus. This is very important if I want to, say, invite someone to my block, because then I can get them, well, in my block. let's talk about what a bloc is really quickly. Now, right now, there is nobody in my bloc, but if there was, that's kind of like being allies. But more accurately, it's sort of owning those countries on like a lease. When they join you, you'll get full access to their entire, military right here. Their whole military will essentially be supporting you in every war that you fight. So getting nations into your bloc and being a bloc leader is very important. You definitely want to expand it as soon as possible with as many nations as you can. When you do have a bloc, you can choose to centralize it via decisions like projects, sort of, or decentralize it. Decentralizing is good if you want a tight-knit group of allies that work together and benefit each other. Centralization is good if you want to use your bloc to essentially diplomatically annex nations around the world without going to war. This is also very useful. How you handle it is up to you. I usually do the diplomatic annex thing, but it is up to you. There is also non-aggression packs that you could try to get. This is part of the DLC. This is a good way to get some relations. You see, Canada accepted that, and now they like me enough to add them to my bloc. You see, it has a cost of money and action points. I can invite them to my bloc. They're in my bloc, and now I essentially own them. I have a bloc now. Here are those integrators I was talking about. Some of these will unify the block, some will not unify it, but they tend to all come with some sort of bonus or maintenance reduction that you could go for. Max unity is needed if you want to diplomatically annex someone in your block. However, it makes usually everybody unhappy and makes them more likely to leave your block, making it harder to keep a strong block, a big block together. So, less unity, bigger block, more members. More unity, smaller block, less members, but you can annex them. So, you figure out how to manage it by yourself. Now, moving down in the internal politics, we have the actual politics. This is what I meant when I said there's some variables to how your nation feels. Democracies, authoritarianisms, and totalitarianisms. These are the three kinds of governments, and they have different factors, such as right here. Democracies can't declare war without very low relations, and they need to have claims, or the UN has to essentially give a go-ahead to attack that nation. You can only request core provinces during peace negotiations. So it's very hard to be a warmonger as a democracy. However, you have a more allowable deficit before you go bankrupt, so that makes the economic part of the game easier. You have a negative relation modifier with authoritarians and totalitarians, but a lot of the democracies will at least like you. Nuclear attacks are very limited, as opposed to authoritarians that can use them freely when defending, but they don't get along as well with the democracies. Both of them have to hold elections every 4 years. However, elections in this game are just a way to change your modifiers. For example, we would become more of a democracy with our next election. I could intervene in this more and easier the more totalitarian I am. I don't need very low relations anymore to declare wars, and I can request whatever provinces I want during peace negotiations. And then totalitarianisms, they really don't get along with democracies. Their deficit allowance is very bad. They can nuclear attack whenever they want, go to war whenever they want, and they can completely reject election results, taking none of these modifiers at all. These are the result, by the way, of your projects, as well as certain events. So you can modify these so you don't have to deal with them in elections to craft a nation and a goal of your choosing. And that's the internal politics. There are the different effects, as I pointed out. I personally prefer playing an authoritarianism, but you have to work your way over there. Then we have under that interventionism and personal control. Still affected primarily by your projects. Lower interventionism means more of a free market. Higher interventionism means you are controlling and protecting the market. Free markets have generally more GDP growth, which is really good for your money, and means that you can have higher taxes without affecting your GDP. It's very good. However, if there's a global recession or depression, then a free market will get hit the hardest. The high interventionism nations don't have to worry about recessions as much. However, they don't grow as much either. With less personal control, there will be more happiness in your nation. With more personal control, there will be less unrest. So you have to strike a balance based on the many different projects. With militarism, well, it's very obvious. High militarism will make your military way more efficient. However, high militarism will also hurt your relations with the world. Stronger military, less easy to make friends and allies. Probably going to get into more wars as well. Again, you have to strike a balance. And then you could see your population and its growth. Positive growth provides a score bonus, very useful. But as I mentioned, population is not great. While population does provide some action points, the scaling it has on projects that are providing bonuses to your population, such as healthcare, for example, very much outweighs that. Thus, the importance of not building social housing, to be honest. But the importance of building tourist infrastructure, because the higher a province score, and it's totally worth it, by the way, to build the next-gen city for more score, in case you're wondering, the more province score there is in any location, and you can sort these, then you get more action points from these locations. And the provinces, as you can see, are generally your main income of it. So more valuable provinces are better. You can go to the statistics, go into provinces, and you can sort by the score. This will reflect if it's been upgraded, but generally speaking, taking low population, high score, this is how you min-max your income of action points, which will just allow you to do more things in general in the game. It's very, very important. In fact, it is the most important thing to manage in this entire game. You may not believe me in 2020, maybe not even in 2050, but by 2070, if you haven't been listening to me, you're going to wish that you had been. Special ocean, Antarctic, and space locations tend to be very low population, very high score, and very high resources, very high natural resources. Hence their importance and why you want to get them. You can usually get them by events that will pop up by investing into them, whatever resource they demand of you. If you just keep investing as much as you can, you'll be more likely to get one and to get the better ones. Although the top dog will not always get one. The top dogs will fight over them, and the top dogs will all generally get something. However, if you are playing someone like, Greece or just someone really tiny, competing for those could be pretty difficult, and you're going to have a harder time about that. This is, again, the top dogs really have it easier in this game. Under the population, we have our HDI. You can see everything affecting it and the result of it. It's how quick you can implement your projects and how quickly you can build your troops. Then you can see your block here. You can go ahead and edit it to give it a new name like NATO, for example. You could also default that as well, see who's in it, click on them, go to them. You could also release provinces that you own. It's good for lowering warmonger points, which will accumulate based on your response to events, how much you warmonger, what you do in general, and there's a lot of warmongering in this game. This is not a peaceful game. There will be many wars and many nukes flying around in this game, just to note. Now, moving on to the economy, we have our finances. This is where we literally manage it. It's just right here and here. You can see your current money that you have sitting around and your monthly balance. We could also see that up here. You could take out a loan if you want or pay off some amount of your debt. Having this paid off eventually is pretty nice, but don't be afraid to take out money in order to pay for things that you need in the short term, especially if there's a time-limited event to claim something like Antarctica or, some space or ocean territories. Very, very useful. You could change your taxes, but do note that that has an effect on your GDP and on your unhappiness. A positive unhappiness growth is unhappiness, by the way. So a negative unhappiness growth is happiness, sort of. So you'd be getting happier. So keep that weird thing in mind. The tax to GDP growth is going to affect your GDP growth up here, and it will affect many, many, many things. And it is affected right here by the world economy. So the more interventionist with lower taxes in general that you could be in a recession that is under the middle, the better. The more free market you could be, and you could have higher taxes, generally the better for you as well. when it goes above the line. So you want to have to keep an eye on the world economy as you decide what to do. You can see your GDP here, the growth, and what projects, for example, are affecting it here that you have, including your interventionism in general and your taxes. Even the world economy, even though it's right next to it, it'll show it there as well. It shows literally everything. You can see your economic development level. This is another one of those many compounding effects where the better you are, the bigger you are, then the better you'll have it. It's GDP per capita. So the higher your GDP per capita, this will give you more growth as well. And it will also give you some HDI, very important, and some population growth, which can technically make it harder to maintain this, but positive population growth gives you score, so you definitely do want it. Under that, we have our unemployment rate. High unemployment causes unhappiness, so we don't want that. You can see what's affecting the unemployment growth here, and it even tells you the exact amount of GDP that you would need to maintain in order to fight unemployment off and stop it from growing. Under that, we have our natural resources, and we can see what's using it, what's giving it, all that good stuff. Moving over to the military, we have our army limit, our unit capacity, and what's being used. We've already talked about some ways to modify that. There's even more in the projects, which we haven't gotten to yet. You can see the maintenance and things that are affecting it right now. It's our militarism is lowering our maintenance. You can see the war losses. This is kind of like war exhaustion. For democracies, high war exhaustion will allow you to have a nuclear attack happen as well. You can see if it's decreasing or not. There's the war theater control. Basically, you could set it if you want to manually control the war system in this game or not, or let the AI take care of it, and if you want them to be normal or aggressive. It's not that hard to manage. This is a simple arcadey game. I'd highly recommend you do this yourself, unless you just have no idea what you're doing, but I swear to you, it's not that hard. Then we have our actual army composition. The normal number is our units. The parentheses is that what is contributed by our bloc. So that's the Canadian units. They will join us in the fight, which is very useful. We hover over and we can see how good our units are against fighting other kinds of units. This can allow us to determine what we need. Transports are needed to wage war across oceans. Navies are needed to fight generally in those conditions as well. But the main thing you need is going to be infantry and armor, and then aircraft to handle, well, each other. And the modifiers of how these even work is determined by your projects. Nobody has different infantry. I get infantry, the UK gets infantry, China gets infantry. It's the projects that determine how good they are against every different kind of unit. When you go past infantry, you start needing natural resources, and it gets more expensive for things like transports. If all you do is attack bordering nations, you won't need transports, which is good because they're expensive. If you don't have access to good natural resources and you need them for projects, then you're mostly going to be fighting alongside infantry, which is not the greatest. So having some natural resources for your armor and aircraft and navy and eventually transport is very, very useful. At the very least, not transports, right, but still to defend yourself with an optimal military. There really isn't an optimal ratio. It just kind of depends how you have your stats set up. As of right now, the tanks are barely better than my infantry, but I can make this way better, whereas the aircraft are amazing. But maybe not against infantry. The main benefit of armor is the fact that infantry cannot hurt it nearly as well as they can hurt other infantry. But aircraft can really help counter that, whereas armor don't really counter themselves. It's sort of a rock, paper, scissors, but also not really. Armor is a good counter to infantry. Air is a good counter to armor. Nothing's really a good counter to air other than air, because then the others just sort of take care of themselves. Then finally, we have the other country panel where, as I said, you can see the stats of someone else. It just kind of takes everything you're allowed to see of these three panels. It puts them all onto one panel for you to see. You could also see the exact provinces that somebody has and jump to them if you would like. On the right side, we have notifications, like of this non-aggression pact. I can expand or collapse these, but there's other things we could see as well here, such as our next elections and the projected changes of our next elections as well. It even lines this out for you, the things we saw in these panels to the left. Then there are the projects. So international is easier to look at, there's less things. Projects are simple, even if they look maybe not simple. If I activate this project, it will take 381 days, and when it's done, I will get this many action points. It will then unlock the next one, which will take 685 days. It will decrease my warmonger and give me 25 score. And this goes on and on and on. Now, not all of these are one-offs. For example, looking at military, I know it looks complicated. I promise it's not that bad. As I mentioned, we can make our tanks stronger. If I got to universal tanks, then I would get a permanent modifier here to the cost of armor become more expensive because it would also be stronger at attacking everything by +2. This is very good. However, it has a pretty heavy cost. And as I add these up, they're going to start costing me action points to maintain. As you see, for vehicle manufacturing, it's costing me 5 money and 4 action points. It's small, but this kind of thing does add up. It's potentially more visible if we went to look at things like basic health services. Right now, it's 7 maintenance. As you see, it scales with population. It also costs money. And as I go up, universal basic health service, we can see we get even more costs. Robotic healthcare systems, even more costs. And these do not replace each other. These are stacking. You see how this can add up when you only have so much action point income and so much action points and whatnot sitting around, so much money. Look how many things there are to activate. It gets pretty crazy. Not everything is even worth it. This is how you customize your nation. Not everything is an improvement. For example, the arms production economy. It does give you GDP growth, but it also gives you personal control and interventionism. If you don't want those, then this is not an improvement. Some things you'll have to make trade-offs for, because some things do just come with these side effects that maybe you can't help. But for example, like an army state here, this makes your infantry weaker because you're relying on conscripts. It makes your military cheaper because the militarism goes up. The unit max capacity goes way up, hurts your relations with the world, but it can get you to reservist training where you could get that unit attack modifier back, but you'll still have hurt relations with the rest of the world, for example, and even more maintenance. And this will go up and up and up and up as your population, GDP, and amount of provinces goes up and up and up. So again, it's not always worth it. There's also some that are not even designed to be permanent. For example, under trade right here, we have things that we could definitely swap around depending on our situation. If we need resources and we don't have any, then we can go down these paths to import for money. And we also need some money and action points to maintain the import infrastructure. Same thing for exports, to export resources for money. The idea is that it kind of trades between who's importing and exporting, but the game's too arcadey to simulate that. This is pretty generic. And then underneath here is outsourcing. Outsourcing allows you to gain unemployment and gain action points. So if you're short on action points, which you will be if you don't listen to me when I tell you that action points are the most important things to value in the long run, so you'll have to get maybe relations with the world would be good if you do a lot of outsourcing, but the unemployment will hurt, but the action points could be worth it. This is not intended to be permanent. This is intended to get you action points when you're short on it, but to give you unemployment when that is worth getting to get the action points. Also, ad hoc actions are definitely temporary. For example, activating a very expensive to maintain yet fairly instant army attack modifier +1 to all attack values, and then militarism target and militarism in general. That is an instant +1 to militarism and +2 to the target for the next election. There's a whole bunch of these, and none of these are intended to be permanent. They are way too costly for what they give, and some of them don't give anything that you would want at all, at least in most circumstances. There are also fairly unique ones, and these are usually very good to get, but they do have prerequisites of other things. Definitely worth going after a lot of these if you have the chance. Now, that's projects. We also have the stock market. This is another situation of those that are already at the top get even more benefits. For using some action points, I can add different nations to my market. For example, I can invite Canada to my market. I can also then spend even more action points to improve their credit rating. If it's maxed out, then they'll have more competitiveness. And then based on our distance, their distance to me, our relations, if they're in my block, and if we share a civilization, their effectiveness will also be affected. And this will generate money for me, just raw money. This is just income. This is just flat out money that you get by having an effective stock market. You can see the world power, basically, how well your stock market fares compared to others. There is an action point cost. You can only get so many. For example, I could also invite someone like, let's say, Mexico. This is a useful way to also try to befriend, sort of, get closer to some other nations as well, while benefiting from them. Big, wealthy nations are the best here because they'll have high GDP. Of course, them being closer to you is good as well. Maxing this out is basically always worth it if you think they're going to be here for a while. Your block members, especially if you're in a block that's decentralized, are very useful for this as well. This even gives you some score income, which can be further modified based on the score of all the members you have. So the higher score members you have in the stock market, the more score your stock market will earn you. The global economy is very, very important for score and money from the stock market. It can really drain away. So if you're too reliant on this for money, you might find yourself running out if you go into a global recession. And you can't do a lot to stop that from happening. It just happens. You can see the world stock market to see how you compete with them. This does affect the competitiveness here to then give you more of a multiplier to benefit from. So again, the better you are overall, the more you'll benefit in the long run. And so I could also invite, say, Brazil. And this is just a very good money and score maker. You're definitely going to want to use this. Now, if you don't want to get to projects through here and other things, there are pop-ups down here you can use. NGO, this is part of the DLC. Organizations will appear and kind of demand things of you based on your actions. It's up to you how to interact with that. Personally, I didn't like NGOs. I find them very annoying, but everything else the DLC gives is very useful. They're more of a problem usually than anything else though. You can also have tasks you can access down here at the bottom left. If you accomplish these tasks, then you get score, money, and sometimes, action points you'll see right here. So increased population, HDI, earnings from the stock market. Some of these you'll have to go after. Some of them, like population, will just accomplish themselves. You could spend score to get rid of these if you think that they are beyond your capability to hit. Just be careful about that because, again, staying as high up as possible in score is not only required to win the game, but also to get the max amount of benefits. You want to be number one constantly. There is then the United Nations, where you could propose all kinds of things. You could try to sanction, say, authoritarians and reduce their army limit. They have to comply with this. They have no choice. So if you're not a democracy, you're constantly at risk of being targeted by the UN. The top 12 GDP members are the ones that are the UN voting members in this game. There are other things such as anti-warmongers, so you get free military intervention if you're a democracy. You could just straight out get permission to attack all totalitarian countries, potentially against a specific country as well. But there's other things here, such as down here, like anti-democratic cooperation. If the UN is dominated by not democracies, you could go after them. It mostly gives you guys bonuses, the authoritarians and totalitarians, but there's other ones that can give bonuses to the world in general and change quite a lot of things, such as right here in support minorities actually generates unrest where there's non-accepted cultures and civilizations like Puerto Rico. This is why converting is very, very important. You can actually target warmongers without targeting them, by causing them to have unrest by having non-accepted cultures and civilizations if they're kind of hitting out of their own regional area. You could even try to nerf stock exchanges if you aren't benefiting from them and you want to try to catch up Yet, the top 12 GDP countries are likely to include the owners of stock markets, so you'll need quite a hefty coalition in order to get that. There will be a round of voting, active resolutions. The more someone likes you and likes what you're offering, the more likely they are to accept it. Then we have nuclear management. You could buy warheads, and so there's a maintenance of money and, as we see, natural resources to maintain these once they're built. And it costs money and an unchanging amount of time to build them, no matter how many of them you are building. Just having them is a decent deterrent for war, but also very important in war. The money cost can be modified by having projects like MAD, for example, and you can see the nuclear powers. These numbers will go way up, more countries will get access to nukes. This is normal. Nukes will be used in wars quite a bit. Again, democracies will barely ever use them. The more dictatorial a nation is, the more likely they are to use them. Usually the first nukes I see go flying is Pakistan and India. It's almost always the first place I see nukes go flying. You can also discard nuclear warheads in case maintaining them becomes too difficult for whatever reason, or you just want to free up these natural resources, maybe get off of imports, for example. As nukes do fly, then there will be problems. First, minor problems in the environment. Then climate anomalies, and even a nuclear winter. This comes with an array of terrible, terrible debuffs on the world's economy and population growth. So this is very bad. Therefore, fighting in whatever way you can the ownership of nukes in other countries and getting rid of nukes in a country is a war goal that you can use, for example. There is also a UN treaty here to make warheads more expensive to try to discourage them. Discouraging it is necessarily a good thing. It is. And not using them is a good thing. But using them might be just what you need against enemy troops, against enemy cities, against enemy strongholds, whatever you choose. Those are usually like the three options right there. And hey, look, another event. This is just an example. Terrorism. There's terrorism in this nation, Tajikistan. And so I can fight a battle in Tajikistan and help them, or I could say no, now that I've clicked on it, and lose some score. And so, oh, there you go. That would actually end up spawning a battle at some point that would be fought. As you see, it popped up here under wars, a terrorist attack incoming. I can attack the terrorists. Let me just do this to show you how wars are fought. I'm just going to assign everything that can do this because I can. Usually you don't want to do this because you're going to fight potentially multiple battles at once. And if you're going to fight multiple battles at once, you maybe only want to assign 50% or less of your total available units. Your units of your block will just kind of take on your own military's characteristics, so you don't have to worry about their military tech lagging behind your own. But I'm going to go ahead and attack the terrorists here. So we see the battle is starting, and this is what a battle looks like. So I can go ahead and assign an operation. So these are all the different operations. There's a lot of them. Just take some time to study them. The higher up, usually the more important. The bottom ones are not as important because like these ones are kind of repeatable. Just to modify, to react to what your enemy is doing. You can see the deadliness of certain actions, as well as the time it takes, and the war score you get for winning. So usually before you want to do the frontal advances, if it's too difficult, you actually want to find some way to equalize a little bit. That's what things like the airstrike is. You know, if you want to kill their armor better or clear the skies, there's different ways to do this. Different unit types are used for these different operations as well. You usually can't repeat these infinitely, however. So for example, we're going to go ahead and we're going to try a breakthrough. It has very low deadliness. It takes armor and infantry, and we have pretty decent armor and infantry. I'm going to unpause. They're doing ambush actions, which is mostly just a modifier. I'm going to go ahead and speed this up. You see, it's on a timer, so these battles will be going over time. You'll have to watch them, check back on them. Now it has started. Now that it has started, we're going to go back and forth based on how good our troops are. This is where the reacting by doing things like ambush operations is useful. They could fight back against me by activating this and thus as you see here, giving themselves attack modifiers. This is good if you're on the defensive. I've now gained war score. The idea is the war score has to reach all the way to the right, the enemy side. I have to completely win in order to, well, win. The whole time you fight battles, you'll be killing enemies. Then eventually, if their armies get too low to maintain all the different fronts that you might be fighting over, then in that case, you're going to just start slaughtering them left and right, because no amount of modifiers will help them then, and the war will kind of just crumble underneath them, or you, if you're not careful. And then generally, that is how this game works. That is everything I can think of to explain to you, and I have been recording for about an hour, so I hope this has been helpful to you. But I'll make some more detailed guides in the future. If you have any questions, leave those in the comments below. I got a playlist in the description below if you want to see other videos I'll be making and have made on this series already. If you want to see any guides, leave those suggestions in the comments below. For now, though, thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.